So thanks very much, and it's great to be here. It's great to, as everyone's noted, it's really humbling to be with these great panelists and to learn so much from others already. I want to start by kind of painting the picture of what you've heard. You all know a lot about the Syrian crisis. We've heard about it today. You've heard about it, I'm sure, over and over again in the past few years. I'm going to ask you to think about it from an operations perspective in a country like Jordan, where I work. I'll sort of spend a little bit of time painting that picture, what that actually looks like, and then I'll talk about the smart city approach. How can ICT and Internet of Things help? I'll use two examples from our work at UNICEF Jordan and what we've learned from it, and then I'll talk about some of what we're thinking of for the next 5 years. So first, just to run through the numbers quickly, in Jordan, currently there are 1.3 million Syrian refugees. So this is in addition to other refugees who have come in the country from Yemen, Palestine, Iraq, Sudan. So at the moment, about 1/3 of the population in Jordan has refugee status. So I really want to pause for a moment and let that sink in. When we talk about the refugee crisis and the migration crisis of where people are coming from and where they're going, we often think about the burden countries in Europe being Greece or Germany. Actually, the high burden countries are Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey. 1 in every 3 people in Jordan right now is a refugee. It's a massive number. So refugees in Jordan, there's essentially 4 contexts that they would be living in Jordan. The first is that they're living in the cities. About 80% of the registered refugees in Jordan are living in the urban areas, mostly in the north. The second context is that there are about 12,000 of them who are living in what we call informal tented settlements. So these settlements actually move around the country. They're mobile populations who move essentially for work. And they're the most vulnerable, really, of all the refugees in Jordan. The third scenario is the refugee camps. There are 2 major refugee camps in Jordan. Azraq refugee camp hosts about 35,000 people, and Zaatari refugee camps hosts almost close to 80,000 refugees. The final scenario is at the border between Syria and Jordan. There's a demilitarized zone that we call the berm. It's refugees who have fled the conflict, but they have not been allowed into Jordan. So they're stuck between Jordan and Syria. They started arriving in November of 2015. They're still arriving now. In Rukban, which is one of these sites, it has close to 50,000 refugees, some of whom have been there for over a year. And there's another site, Hadalat, which has a similar number of people. I just want to emphasize in this context, we actually don't have humanitarian access. So we do deliver, but we are not actually allowed into the demilitarized zone. So these are the 4 contexts. They're very different. What's similar, of course, is that all of these refugees have the same rights. In fact, they have the same rights that you have or the same rights that I have. They have the same basic needs. They have the same basic needs that you have and the same basic needs that I have. What's different, operationally speaking, is how we deliver. It's very different across all these 4 contexts. So I am going to focus on the refugee camps today and shift gears a little bit to talk about my hometown, Portland, Maine. So this is my hometown, Portland, Maine. It's a small city. It has about 66,000 people. It was settled in the 1600s. You can see a lot here. You can see the working waterfront. There's actually a sea urchin factory here. You can see a church. You can see my dad's office building in the back. You can see shops. This is a condominium complex. Why am I bringing this up? As I mentioned, there's 66,000 people in Portland. Well, in Azraq, there's 35,000. Zaatari is actually bigger than the town that I grew up in. And what was underlining this picture that you saw before is a plumbing system. You assume it's there. You know it's there. There's electricity. You know that's there. You can assume it. In the camp context, this is all set up essentially overnight. Portland, Maine had 400 years to evolve into what it is today. We've set up Zaatari and Azraq in 5 years. Zaatari 5 years. Azraq has been there for about 3 years. So anything that you can assume you're seeing in Portland, Maine, you're seeing here as well. We've set up playgrounds. We've set up schools. This is the water network, energy, mobile phone repair, transportation, and it goes on and on. People are getting married, people are giving birth, they're having their children registered when they're born, getting birth registration. This is a massive undertaking, and the way that we organize this within the humanitarian community is that we all have our particular domains. It's called the cluster coordination system. We take the lead on particular elements of it, and we coordinate the response underneath our domain. So for UNICEF, we manage the water and sanitation, so you might be surprised to learn that the biggest team in UNICEF Jordan is actually water engineers. We manage the education section, and we also manage child protection. So what's the opportunity? Okay, this is the obvious one, right? We started on paper, now we have an app. But what's behind this is something much more fundamental. Because when we move from a paper system to a digital system, we're actually changing the way we do our programs. We're changing from an approach where we're doing accounting at the end of the program to where data is driving the program itself. And I'll explain more what I mean by that in a minute. The second thing that is not really pictured here, but I'll talk about it later, is that technology allows us to better engage with the beneficiaries, with the residents of the camp. We can communicate with really individuals almost at scale. And this is fundamentally different than what we were able to do before. And we can also create the infrastructure for the camp residents to do the same, to connect with each other. And this increases resilience. So I'll talk about some of this. The reason we're interested in exploring the cutting edge technologies in ICT and Internet of Things is because we want to make our services more efficient, we want to make access to them more equitable, and we want to essentially improve our accountability to the refugees themselves. So this is the basics. Across these 4 scenarios that I described in the beginning, we have to think about the infrastructure, we have to think about the hardware, and we have to think about the software. And actually, across all of those 4 scenarios, these look very different. So in the camp context, we don't have internet access. And it's not because we can't set it up, it's not because the technology is not available, it's because it's jammed, and it's been jammed for about 2 years. For the hardware, we have, of course, most refugees have a smartphone. Many of them have tablets as well. It's easy for us to bring in computers to the camp, these type of thing. But we need hardware that can work without internet. Of course, all hardware can work without internet, but we can really be visionary about what we're able to do with hardware in the absence of internet if we think about, if we understand that this is our starting point. And then finally, it's the same for the software. We have to be thinking of software that works outside of an internet structure and developing these 3 in relationship to each other. So the hardware and the software really have to cover for this gap in the infrastructure. So I decided I would be nerdy and technical because if you can't do it at something called the Turing Talks, then when can you do it? So, okay, so this is, as I mentioned, UNICEF manages the water network and the waste network. So what you're seeing here is a waste collection in action. The residents of Zaatari have private waste facilities. The waste goes to shared tanks. There are 2,500 shared tanks across the camp. This is massive, and think about the quality of life issue and the health issues that are involved in making sure we have an efficient system to collect this waste. If these tanks overflow, I mean, the refugees are going to start throwing rocks. There's a huge health impact. It's smelly, it's gross, people don't want to leave their caravans, they don't want to come home. It's hugely important to get this right. So the hardware that we use is very simple, and actually this software is very simple too. This is a laser reader. It basically measures the level of waste in the tank before the collection and after the collection, and then the next time they come, it does the same. He enters it on this tablet, and what we can do, we have an algorithm that determines what we call the fill rate, so how quickly this tank fills up. We do this across 2,500 tanks in the camp, and then we have a daily operational plan that dispatches these trucks. It's actually very simple. It's, the algorithm and the data behind it is extremely rich and extremely, it was a lot to collect. We have how big the trucks are, how long the hoses are, how difficult it is to get to this particular tank. This is all at the kind of early stages of developing this program. The algorithm can learn, or it's dynamic. So if someone gets a washing machine or somebody moves, it'll detect that there's a new fill rate, and it'll change the dispatch for that particular tank. So that's the innovation, was really a very simple one, an old technology actually. It was the data that really allowed us to do something very new with it. And I also wanted to kind of zoom in on this for a second because I have another talk about frugal innovation. This metal piece was fabricated in the camp, and we're moving more and more towards camp-based fabrication for things like this that we need. Here's a connected classroom. I'll just run through this one very quickly. This also runs on a Raspberry Pi server, so even though we don't have internet, these tablets are connected. We get a lot of data from this as well. It's anonymized by the time it gets to UNICEF, but we can monitor the performance of different schools, of different classes, and the teachers can also better monitor the student participation rates and things like this. So this is also a data-driven exercise. And that's the real value added of this. Okay, looking ahead. So this is what I'm most excited about, is bringing in social networks and what that will enable us to do in the camps. So this is Salman. He is a construction worker, and he has these beautiful children, as you can see. We're starting a time bank we're piloting it now in Azraq, where Salman can use his construction skills in exchange for skills that other people may have that can support his family in other ways. So in this case, he's actually standing under a shade that he built for a barber, and you can see they all have these very lovely haircuts. And this was a skills exchange. So at the moment, the way we're piloting this is that we go around and we find the Salman, and we find the person who has the skill that Salman needs, and we connect them. Of course, what we would like to do is digitize this and turn this into something where these people can find each other, and they actually, will monitor the system, but they don't need us. The other thing that I'm really excited about is co-creation with youth in the camp. So actually, the youth have designed the Time Bank program. This is my brown hair in the corner to me, and they're pitching the pilot activity to me. Next week, they're pitching it to the military police in Azraq and UNICEF head of office. And once we have permission, we'll start building out the technical system for this as well. So we are now training 100 youth in Zaatari and 100 youth in Azraq to collect data, to pilot programs, and to do user testing on technology products. And in fact, one of the things we're doing with Techfugees is that we're asking them to find clients for these guys. So if you have a technology that you want tested, you can hire these kids to do it for you. And finally, we're really looking at hardware. As I mentioned, we are constrained in the infrastructure. The software, most of the software that's readily available is based on an assumption of internet access, which we don't have. So we are looking at what we're calling Internet of Things without the internet. Connected devices that are connected to each other and can create, a local network without actually being connected to the internet. And we're looking at this for sensors, we're looking at this for air quality measurement, we're looking at this for education initiatives for these social networks. All of these require connected devices, but we actually don't need the internet because the camp, as I mentioned, is essentially a self-sustaining economy. So that's it, that's all I got, and I really welcome your questions. And again, I thank you for being here.